Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do a follow-up to a video I did a couple months back about the current state of editing within publishing and the book industry as a whole. Within that video I did somewhat center it around a specific book, but I also use that more so as a jumping off point to get to a broader conversation. I had a really unique opportunity with that, where the book that I was discussing was one that hadn't yet come out. I'd been sent a completed copy, not an art copy, but a completed copy of a book, and I was reading it leading up to the release of it with the intention of reviewing it because I wanted to try to get around to it around when the release was up, and I was struggling quite a bit with the book. I felt perhaps maybe eyes on the book a few more times from a professional editor might have helped. And I know that a lot of us have had this feeling, even if we can't always pinpoint exactly, or we kind of get bogged down in this conversation with the concept of subjectivity within books, which is a very real thing. Of course, there are times where certain writing styles, we just don't prefer them, or sometimes there are authors who are purposefully breaking certain writing rules, but they're doing it with intention, and there is oftentimes some kind of artistic purpose behind it. It can become difficult to actually feel like we can have a conversation where bias is left at the door and we can just talk about the editing. And because of the fact that that book wasn't out yet, I felt, okay, this is a good opportunity where I can show examples. I'll just leave out any specifics that might give away what the book is, like the names of the characters as an example. And I can just genuinely ask a lot of you, what are your thoughts on these passages? Is this just me? A couple times that there were things that, for example, there was one instance where it was truly just a typo, which actually I can be more forgiving of than some of the other things we talked about in that video. But I'll go ahead and talk about the book today. I also wanted to mention I had a poll in that video asking all of you, the things I'm pointing out, do these things bother you? And if so, to what degree? And so I want to kind of discuss the results of that. But then there's an additional thing that I want to dive into that relates to all of this that also kind of came about because of that previous video. If you haven't watched that video, you don't have to, but I do think it adds a lot of context to this one. But I'll have it linked in case you do want to check it out. And then, of course, feel free to jump back to this one or not in case you're like, I don't want to hear any more from this lady. Anyway, the book. We can establish what the book was. So the book was The Strength of the Few. I meant what I said in my video when I said I am not going to say what the book is because I'm trying as much as possible to remove bias from the equation. Not that I think all of you are incapable of being able to look at the examples I was providing and look at it as objectively as possible, but naturally as human beings, we do have a certain level of bias, and we are going to maybe view things differently depending on what the current conversation is about a certain genre or a certain author. So for example, a lot of times authors like Brandon Sanderson and Sarah J. Maas, they're really big names, and the more popular they get and the longer some of their books get, it does feel like the more people are inclined to wonder if they're not being edited as thoroughly. So if I were to say this book was written by Brandon Sanderson, it feels like perhaps there's a higher likelihood that we would be set up to think, oh yeah, for sure, these popular books are not being edited as much. And again, I don't mean to infantilize or treat anybody like they can't look at something with a decently objective lens, but I just felt like we had a really unique opportunity because the book wasn't officially out. We had a really unique opportunity to just remove as much bias as possible. So I said, I don't want to say what the book is, but I will reveal this later. And when I did that, the poll, I asked all of you after going through a number of different examples of the editing within that. I asked all of you, like I said earlier, would this bother you? Would you DNF it? Would it affect your reading experience? I asked all of those things. And the majority of you, at the very least, said it would negatively impact your reading experience. A decent percentage of you said that you would have DNF'd the book. Very, very few of you said it wouldn't annoy you at all. The majority of people said it would bother them. I really wasn't sure when I was reading the book because you kind of have this feeling of isolation when you're reading something where you start to wonder, oh, is this just me? Is this something other people would be frustrated by? So on a personal note, it was nice to see that we kind of collectively, we actually did identify a lot of us, and not that all of us are the full representation of all book readers, but it was kind of nice to be able to be like, okay, this isn't in our head. A lot of us are finding there's some issues with this. Now, I will say, I'm sure some of you who watched that video and were frustrated by the passages that I mentioned have gone on to read that book, and you probably really liked the book. Because, of course, if there's a book where you like the characters, you like the plot, sometimes some of the editing aspects of the story, they aren't as frustrating once you enter into the picture all these other things that we do really like. We can be more forgiving of some of this stuff if we really like this stuff. That's happened to many of us. I know for myself, not even talking about editing, just talking about a really basic writing style. Sometimes there are books out there where the writing is nothing to be punny, nothing to write home about, but the story's fun, or you love the characters, or you love the themes, and so you're like, I don't really need the writing to sparkle as long as I like the other stuff. So I recognize that maybe if I were to do the poll now for everybody that's read The Strength of the Few, maybe it would turn out a little bit different. I do want to actually acknowledge, though, some of you knew. There was one person that had a really cheeky comment that I was like, teehee, you know and I know, because you must have also gotten an early release. There was another person that I'm not trying to like call anybody out or anything, but there's another person that was, they were like, this is the book, and they were basically saying they thought I was trying to be nice by not mentioning it, and again, no, that's not what was going on. I just wanted to remove bias, like I said. But they were like, we need to hold publishing accountable, and we need to, they were kind of having this like rise up and demand better editing response. And I felt you for sure, but I was like, hold on, don't worry. We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll talk about it. Don't worry. But I do find it very concerning. This is the part of the conversation that is really new to all of this. After I made that video, I had a author reach out to me, and they said, hey, I've watched your video, and I know who this author is. I've read their books before. They said that their editor, who they've worked with on some of their books, and they have really praised their editor before. They feel like their editor, in a lot of ways, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but from what I understand, they're really grateful to their editor because they feel like their editor kind of found the diamond in the rough, if you will, that they really helped polish the book, which is what any writer wants from an editor. But that their writer, this is a traditionally published author, their editor has been let go. And this author's assumption moving forward is that more and more publishing is going to start leaning into possibly AI doing the editing for the books, and then maybe just hiring somebody to do a line edit, if even that. But it would seem some editors, and if you yourself work in the industry and you want to chime in about this, you are welcome to, of course. But some editors are being let go, and instead of being in-house, they're more freelance that they're hiring, like contract. And I don't know in the past how frequent that was, so I don't want to try and act as though I am the authority on this, and I just know so much about how the industry is run. But hearing that their amazing editor was let go, and that there is a decent amount of contract labor and freelance, I find this very, very concerning. So kind of to that person's point who had no, we need to hold them accountable. I'm wondering, because it wasn't so long ago that there was a publishing house where there was a major strike against them because of how they treated their employees, because of the not very good pay that they gave their employees. I am worried that this is around the corner. Not just because readers want things to be better, because a lot of us do, but again, it's really difficult to collectively decide because of the subjectivity side of things. In fact, taking a little side quest for a second, this might be a topic of conversation for another video, but I saw somebody mention some editing for a completely different book that I have not read, and apparently a number of people were pointing out that this very popular book that came out had really bad editing. And the person was asking, would these things bother you or not? And it was a similar setup to what I was talking about in my editing video, except for they were very succinct. And also they hadn't actually read it. They were just saying, here's what all these other people are saying. And some of the responses were very different. Talking about before how, all of us here are not the authority for all people. We're not speaking on behalf of all book readers. And this proves it. Where a lot of you were like, yeah, we need better editing. Over here about this other book, people were like, people are too picky. I go off of vibes. I didn't even notice. And if what the criticisms are being stated about this other book if they're true, we're talking characters, the wrong characters being named in scenes where they're not even there. like really intense editing mistakes that somebody should have caught. And some people were like, I didn't even notice. And you're like, how do you not notice that there's a character that's mentioned that's not even there? How do you not notice that? And that, again, can be a conversation for a whole other day, because that's a more of a how much do we play a role in expecting better of the books we're getting. But anyway, back to this idea of there being this fear that I have that, you know, not so long from now we might end up having a strike, is that I don't know that readers, that all of us are going to be able to figure out a way to come together, because what might be seen as a good amount of editing to one reader is not going to be considered the same to someone else. What I think, though, is a possibility is that people who work in publishing, similar to what happened with the strike a couple years ago, that the people who work within editing are likely going to be the ones to push back because they're not being valued, and it's obviously affecting, or at least I think obviously affecting, the end results. We have books that a lot of people like. We have books that are popular. We have well-known household names within various different genres whose books do not feel at the level that they have felt in the past. And it seems like it's partially because publishing just wants to push out whatever they can and as fast as they can. And they're just like, yeah, eat up, plebeians. Enjoy what we're going to give you. Enjoy these scraps. And they're not going to value the people who typically are the ones that help make books shine. And I even said in my other first part of this discussion, in the other video, I really wanted to emphasize that I don't think that this is the fault of the editor. And I was really wanting to emphasize that point because I had a feeling that the editors are either not being given enough time, they're not allowed to work through it multiple times, because that is a thing when you're traditionally published. Part of the perk of having a publishing house where you share in the profits of your book is that they will provide for you professionals, I really want to emphasize, people who have degrees and certifications in this, that they really know what they're talking about, more than the average reader, certainly by a lot. These are expected in traditional publishing, and as a result of having to pay all those other people, that is part of why we pay a pretty hefty price tag when we buy these books, and also the price of books is going up. So if the price of books is going up, but the quality is going down, and you're not even probably paying your employees as well, then what the heck is, how do you expect us to not be displeased about this? And I have a feeling from the inside it's going to start happening. I mean, I don't know how, especially because if they're freelance a lot of times, then it makes it harder for them to come together as industry, and also probably you don't get benefits. That's another side of it. And I know that certain things to do with benefits is different from one country to the next. But in the US, if you are freelance, there's a chance that you're not getting healthcare, and that's a big deal in America. So, I mean, it's possible that it's not just a salary thing, but also a benefits thing. And I really feel for the editors who are probably not being valued. And then readers who maybe don't have the full picture might turn around and be like, who's even editing this? The editing is terrible. And that's not fair, because it's probably that the editors aren't being given enough time. I know this is a slightly different thing to note, but something somewhat related is that there have been issues where, in an effort to make a certain book translated so that you can reach other audiences, publishers are going to AI to do the translations, which is such a terrible idea. I only speak one language. I am one of those like basic Americans who only knows English. And even I know that from one language to the next, you want to have somebody who really, really thoroughly knows not just the languages between the two, but also the best ways to try to capture what's being said in one language and another, because oftentimes there aren't direct translations. They're also just hearing people talk about speaking in different languages. You do not want to outsource that to AI. AI is gonna suck at translating things. I mean, AI is like, as a translation thing, is like, where's the bathroom? Like, that's the level that you would maybe want to use that translation technology for, not the translation of a book. But the point is, there have been translators who, once again, these are people who spend so much time to gain this knowledge, for the benefit of us as readers and also the artist in this instance, which would be the author, to be able to share the story with as many people as possible. What a gift. And we're not valuing them at all. Or I should say publishing's not, because I think a lot of us do. But we're not valuing them, and then we're just expecting either AI to do it, or we're not giving them hardly any time. And then I think it creates this false sense of blame on editors, on the translators, because we sit here and we go, wow, this translator's not very good, or wow, this editor was terrible, instead of being like, hey, I feel like there's something else going on here. And in this instance, it seems like whoever's making the big decisions, it's kind of their fault. And what's especially frustrating too, there's a number of things that have been frustrating today, but I think a lot of us have noted that ever since 2020, one of the things to come out of that has been one of the few positives, you could say, out of that time, was that a lot of people found reading again, and that's incredible, and that's lovely. And we have bookstores opening up again. You have a lot of bookish shops. We have more special editions than you could dream of, and we have book boxes with dedicated teams who are trying to bring artists who are also under threat when it comes to their livelihoods because of AI. They're bringing together and providing opportunities for these amazing artists alongside authors and then presenting it to us readers. All this is incredible. And yet, despite the boom that books have had over the last 5 to 6 years, we are somehow eliminating the very people that have made this possible, also that you can make a little bit more of a quick buck. I honestly wonder if over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, if we're going to start seeing almost like anniversary editions of books, or like the definitive editions of books, because that happens. Sometimes you'll have, I actually think this has happened with Stephen King. I think this has happened with Brandon Sanderson's Elantris, if I'm not mistaken. You will have times where a book that's a little bit older will kind of get repolished and then put out again, and it's like, this is the real story, with all the little tweaks that the author wished they could have made before or after it came out. I wonder if we're going to start getting a lot more of those. If we course correct and we do start to value, this is if we course correct. I don't know what's going to happen if we don't. But if we do course correct, if possibly there's a strike, and if possibly there are workers that are trying to demand better rights for themselves, better wages, better benefits, all those things, if that occurs and we course correct, I do feel like the people who have suffered along the way are going to be the authors who took a chance thinking traditional publishing houses were going to put in the work on their behalf, and then they're not really putting in the work on their behalf. And I know for myself, I said, with the strength of the few, at the time, when I did that video, I had DNF'd it. I will go back and I will read the whole book. It might be a little bit, but I do plan to. That's always going to be kind of a thing that I have in the back of my mind, which is that this doesn't feel like it's the best version of what it could be. And it doesn't necessarily feel, though, like it's entirely on the author. So I don't want to punish the author. I don't want to tell all of you, don't check the book out. I don't want to say I could never recommend this. I don't think that's fair, because I don't want the author's career to suffer as a result. But I also don't really know what the solution is. If in the future you do start getting more definitive editions, perhaps I might check those out more, but we have no idea where all of this is going to go. So I just wanted to kind of, like I said, do a follow-up to that video, share the poll results, share some of the information that was sent to me by an author about this whole situation. And if you have more to add to this, if you want to mention some other pieces of this conversation that I didn't even touch on, feel free to do that. I feel very passionately about this. I think, based off of a lot of the comments I've seen from all of you, that a lot of you feel really passionately about this. And I recognize that some of you, because I've talked about AI before, and I know that some people, AI is just too big of an umbrella term, because some people at their jobs force them to use AI in some capacity. But when we say AI, obviously if you're talking about AI helping screen for cancer sooner or something like that, that's very different than outsourcing creatives who the only reason the technology is even possible is because you stole from creatives. When we're talking about that kind of stuff, that's very different. And so I don't want any of you to feel like you are somehow part of a problem because you didn't quit your job when they started implementing AI into your customer service feed or whatever. I hope that that's not what anybody's taking away from this. The blame is on these people that are taking advantage, that are being exploitative, and that are trying to make the most amount of money for the least amount of value for those who deserve it. Anyway, like I said, if you have more to add, please feel free to do so. And perhaps in the future, this will be another conversation, because I'm sure there will be more that comes to light, or there will be more things to put into this. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.